cool. Let's dive into an example of where I gather sample data. So, of course, there's so many different files types. You can do Excel, SQL data, sample data. Doesn't really matter, or you can create your own data source. But we're gonna do something from scratch. So let's just start with a blank report just to show. And of course, once you set your own reports, if hired on, then it would be like a weekly report, a monthly report, a quarterly report. So let's just use sample data, and this is just a practice exercise that I'll be pulling from. Let's just load up some financial data since I'll be right here. And we're gonna just run some sample data. Let's load this data up, and let me open this to make this a little bit wider. It's a large data set, so one moment. And again, I'm running, it's essentially like two different systems that I'm running, so it's let's give it a second or two here. All right, let's make this a little wider. OGS is the cost of goods, and let's put this in the x-axis, and we could do it by country. So of course over here, these are the different visualizations. You have stack bar charts, columns, tables. You can do arrays, slicers. You can do different KPIs or key performance indicators. So let's do that. Let's do it by the date. And this thing is real laggy for some reason. Let's put that right there too. And then let's see sales and profits. All right, so you can do bar charts, and then you can always expand your models. And of course, once you create your own model, that's the good thing about Power BI. It's very creative, and it's like you kind of can make your own metrics and stuff. And then while you do that, and this is basically the visualizations, and of course your data set, you can always collapse it if you don't want to view all that. And let's do it by the year. So let's say we're looking at 2014 goals. Then you can also do gross sales and put that right here. And then by date. And then let's do another one. Let's see. And of course, so let's do this right here. Right, so this would be the sum of cost of sales. And then let's do a line chart. And then let's do it by the different countries and compare it to sales. Right, so in this case, let's call this, I don't know, SLA performance, right? And again, I'm just making this up because it's not actual. Like the data that I have is just like from scratch, and then we can even look at profits. But let's say if I'm looking at it, let's make it a new one. Let's look at profits, and then units sold. Wait, let's do it by here. So you can do units sold, and you can kind of see like the different metrics of how it's operating. Or let's say if I'm developing it like from straight scratch from Excel. But of course, you can use SQL data. You can get data from so many different ways. You can use data flows. I mean, of course, everybody is very knowledgeable in Excel. Get a CSV file, or you can get blank queries. But if I'm looking at a template that I created, let's open one up or open up two examples that worked. And while that loads up, I just want to say, while this loads up, all right, so this would be for Canada. Let's say this is like, we can call this Atlanta or something. Just making this up. This is something that I already developed, and then let's call this, it's still loading. And again, call this, let's rename this. It's taking forever, like it's so laggy. Okay, let's call this policy compliance, I don't know, below threshold, right? We at the enterprise level. This is just, profit segments, cost of goods, and sales by segment. Thing is, once you've kind of created the framework or the dashboards, once they're saved, let's say I have to do cost of goods and the cost of sales, and then let's open up a Word doc while I'm doing this. So let's say if I'm gathering requirements, let me see examples of metric. Hold on, MTR metric remediation. Let's call it policy compliance below thresholds. Call it 72% compliance versus 95% target. Right, and then we can call it like a root cause. Let's call it the DevOps team. Right, and another one can be, let's call it this example 2. Let's call this endpoint while all the data models are being loaded, and let's take some time. The good thing is, once it's created and developed, then it's really same thing, doing meetings, and they'll update as time goes on. Let's say the metric was to meet at 83% of endpoints have control deployed versus 90%, something like that, right? And then come up with some remediation actions or whatever, right? So let's call it remediation actions, and then we could say something like update. And again, I'm just making this up as I go along. Schedule bulk updates for existing EX, existing unprotected. Loads up, but we can kind of go back probably to this original sheet that I had. And just to go in a little bit more details, back to that Word doc that I was creating. Go back to that Word doc as well. One moment while that comes up. Yeah, back to this doc. So yep, so that can be examples, and then another example is, I don't know, less than 5%. Call this threshold, right? And then the root cause, policy guidance. It's kind of like doing a control test where you have the implemented control name, description, and IC number. So let's call it policy guidance. Led to increase request load from GitHub or something for the DevOps teams or something. I'm just making this up again. And it could be many other teams, and then we can come up with remediation actions. GitHub remediation. This will be the last example I have while that loads up. Let's say provide real-time exception handling FAQs, right? Facts or FAQs. You can call it facts, questions, and answers. Fact answers and questions, and then that increased about 4 months or whatever, right? And then while that goes on, let's see if yay, it loaded up. Yeah, so we can call this like Atlanta data, right? And then we can call this, you know, the policy compliance below threshold, or we can call this for that example too that I had. We called it forgot what I called it. Oh yeah, it was called endpoint control. Let's say policy compliance endpoint control coverage. So, you know, anything you may need, Christian and Brandon, I'm here. You know, you may say, hey, gross sales. No, not the gross sales. Let's do about a month. Okay. So these are some reports to be built out, and let's do, like, you can call it the count of transactions of profit bins. These are just random data sets that I made, and then we could do maps as well, where they get channeled in. Let's remove this visualization. Move that one. And what's cool about Power BI, you can always customize it. Alright, and then an example, this is probably going back to that document I just created. You know, we can call this, you know, the exception upsurge. Name. Again, I'm just making this up, and then you can have it at the enterprise level, and then you can see distributions. And of course, what data set to be required and pulled, but I've done it with SQL, SAP HANA. There's so many different types of data sets you could insert, which is pretty cool, and like different models you can utilize, and you could build reports and format reports. You could do, you know, cluster charts, bar charts, stack charts, waterfall metrics. So it's pretty cool of the optionalities that you can have. But most importantly, SLA deviation. We can even call this that. Let's rename this. Let's call this SLA performance, right? Or these tables, we could call this an executive metric report. And then of course, once you know, once you become creative and kind of have the dashboards developed, you can always save it and you can always refresh it with new data sets. So those are kind of requirements. So, and that kind of goes back to that Word doc I had, where that's how I gather requirements, set up calls, set up meetings. And I've worked with many different tools before. So